This screencast is to support this lesson, which focuses on fears and phobias as a topic, and with the language aim of some word building and functional language explaining reasons using linking words. The reference is straightforward upper intermediate student's book. Publisher is Macmillan, and it was written by Philip Kerr and Kerry Jones. Okay, so let's have a look at how we're going to go about teaching this lesson. We need a lead-in to engage students in the topic. The teacher's book suggests introducing the concept of phobia, first of all, by perhaps telling a little anecdotal story. They suggest one about a guy called Joseph who is terrified of mushrooms. You can decide how to introduce the concept of phobia. The important thing is not to tell the students the word, but to see if you can elicit it somehow. Then we can move on to exercise 1, the speaking activity. The students can look at the list of phobias and decide which one would be the most difficult to live with and why. So they've got a choice of 6. They can think about some ideas for a couple of minutes, maybe make some notes, and then get them talking together about their ideas. We're not going to do the listening, as you haven't yet learned how to do a listening with your students. We're going to move on to the personalised questions 1 and 2. What are you afraid of, and what were you afraid of as a child? So personalising the topic. Again, get the students to talk together and find out if anyone's got a phobia of anything. Okay, then we're going to move on to number 4. You could include that in your discussion. Do you know of anyone who suffers from an extreme or an unusual fear? Okay, so lots of nice discussion to have at the beginning of the lesson and get them thinking about the topic. Okay, now we need to prepare them for the reading tasks that are coming up in the lesson. And the first thing we need to do is to think about any blocking vocabulary that's going to hinder their ability to do the tasks we're setting them. So we need to look at the text and try and see which words we think the students will find difficult and pre-teach them. The teacher's book suggests about 10, along with phobia, which they've already covered in the first part, and the suffix phobia, such as claustrophobia, and the suffix phobic, to make an adjective describing people who have a phobia. There are some other words in the reading, such as hereditary, be prone to something, conditioning, acupuncture, acronym. Choose a maximum of 6 to pre-teach from the teacher's notes, page 45. One way of checking they understand the meaning and to make a student-centred task would be to make a matching task where they've got the new language from the reading on the left and they have to match the word or the phrase with the definition. Then do some work on pronunciation, how many syllables, where's the stress, and do some drilling. So now we've dealt with the blocking language from the text, the students are ready to start preparing to read it. Reading exercise 1 asks the students to work in pairs and discuss 5 questions. Ask the students to read the questions and think about the answers to them. Give them a little bit of time to make some notes. Tell them not to worry if they don't know the answers to some of the questions, as they will find out the answers in the reading text. Once they've discussed the 5 questions, they can then move on to exercise 2, where they read the article and match the questions they've just discussed to the answers A to E in the text. So you can see in the text that each paragraph is labelled A to E. So they read the text quickly and they match the question from reading exercise 1 to the paragraph A, B, C, D or E. Get them to do this alone and then to compare their answers with the other students before nominating for feedback and showing them the answers. So you could just show the letter and the numbers that match. Well, now they've read the text quickly, they're ready to read in more detail, so they can do exercise 3. Complete the article by putting the phrases A to G in the gaps 1 to 7. You can see there are 7 sentences labelled A to G, and each of them go in one of the gaps in the text. Ask the students to do this alone. Same procedure. Get them to check their answers together before feedback and showing them the answers. Once they've completed the reading task, exercise 4 is another discussion task. What information would you expect to find on the other pages of a section of a health magazine about fears and phobias? The teacher's book suggests you could give them an example to get them going, such as a list of clinics to go for help. It's up to you whether you do this further discussion question. Okay, so now we're going to analyse some of the language that's appeared in the text. And the first thing we're going to do is look at some of the vocabulary and do some word building. Vocabulary exercise 1 says complete the table with words from the text. So we've got 6 different groups of noun, adjective and negative adjectives, and the students need to fill in the gaps. So do the first one together. Say to the students, look at the negative adjective, fearless. What's the noun that comes from that? And what's the adjective, so the positive adjective? See if they can do that. They can talk together, put the answer in, and then instruct them to do the rest on their own. Pair check when they've finished, and get some answers by nominating students and showing them the answers. This is a challenging but really useful activity for the students. And, it's hard for them to remember all the different rules around making nouns, adding suffixes, etc. So it's really good practice for them. It's helpful that once they've completed the activity, that we do some concept checking to check they understand the meaning of some of the trickier words. For example, I might say, okay, so anxious, can anyone give me a word which is similar to anxious? They might say stressed, worried. I might say, in what kind of situation might I feel anxious? Before an exam, before my driving test, etc. That's also a good one to drill because it's tricky. Anxious, anxious, and anxiety, anxiety. You could even ask them to talk together and say the words and tell each other where the stress is once you've done a little bit of practice and an example together. Okay? Caution, the H in harm is tricky. The spelling, students often forget that the suffix full only has one L. So there's lots of checking to be done there with meaning, form and pronunciation before they move on to the practice task, exercise 2, where they have to complete the sentences with a word from the table. So do number 1 together. I like to just have number 1 on my slide so they're not looking at the others or racing ahead. So we could show the sentence and say which word from the table would you put in the gap. I'm going to give you 1 minute and see if they can find the right word. Once they've done that, instruct them to do the rest of the sentences. As usual, peer check and nominate, feedback and show them the answers. Then number 3 is quite nice. It personalizes the task. So we go back to exercise 2, and this time the students replace the phrases in italics so that they are true for them. So for example, the last time I felt really anxious about an exam was when I took my English test to start a course at college. Or number 2, I know that spiders are basically harmless in this country, but I don't like touching them. Sit back and listen while students discuss these sentences about themselves, and then when they finished, you could ask them if they found out anything interesting about anyone they spoke to. Now we're going to look at the grammar, which is explaining reasons using different linking devices. So that, in order to, in case, and otherwise, all useful. The first thing I would do is get the students to look back at the text and find 4 sentences, one that contains each of these linking phrases. Once they can see clearly examples of the language in context, they'll be able to fill in the gaps using the different linking phrases in the white box here. You can either put them into breakout rooms to do this, if that's possible, or they can just talk together and try to work out what the answers are. Alternatively, you could give them 3 or 4 minutes to do it on their own and then compare their answers with their peers. Check that they've filled in the gaps correctly and then do a little bit of drilling. For example, otherwise, otherwise. How many syllables? Where's the stress? And then thinking about how the phrases sound within a sentence. What happens to the language? For example, in order to becomes in order to do so in the sentence in the text. In order to, in order to do so. So that becomes so that they know, etc. So really drawing students' attention to what happens to the language when it's in a sentence and how it changes. In terms of understanding the form, students need to know that these words and phrases are used to link 2 parts of a sentence together. Now they've got the rules, time for some practice, so they can do exercise 2, where they complete the text with the correct linkers. You might want to pre-teach some of the vocabulary. I would choose oversleep, house sit, keep an eye on something, and backup alarm. Students complete the text with the correct linkers and then compare their answers before you check with the class. Once they've done it, you can elicit from them what Jenny is afraid of. Now it's time for some fun with the speaking activity. Tell students you're going to put them into 2 groups. You can either do this by putting half of your students in a breakout room, or just get half of them to look at one set of instructions and the other half to look at the other set of instructions on your slide. Give one group of students, Group A, this set of instructions. Get them to choose a phobia from the list and then complete the sentences for their chosen phobia in as many ways as they can think of. So for example, I might choose a fear of vegetables, and for sentence 1, I might put sufferers of this phobia have to avoid vegetables at all costs, otherwise they have a panic attack, or they need to eat lots of fruit so that they get the vitamins they need. Students can have fun and be a bit inventive here. The other group at the same time do the same thing but with a different set of phobias and sentences. Set a time limit and make sure they all make notes. Now get students to talk together and interview each other about the phobia they'd written about. And then they can try and guess what the phobia is. It's up to you whether you try and put them in breakout rooms for this or do it as a whole group, but make sure everybody gets involved. Draw their attention to the useful language at the bottom. You poor thing, that must be really difficult for you, and get them using that language. Monitor carefully while they're speaking, listen in, and write down some good examples and some incorrect examples of anything you can hear where they're using these linking words or any of the adjectives or nouns from the word building activity. You could make a Word document Then once you've got feedback on what they found out in the activity, you could get the students to look together at the sentences and correct any incorrect sentences. Thank the students and close the class.